Let's move to future actions.
Yeah.
So the West is united, well, the world is united, except for the exceptions that you already described. And Putin is having a lot of trouble on the ground. And as far as you're concerned, he wasn't well prepared either on the propaganda or the military front. And he's going to suffer substantial economic costs. And so this, at the moment, this does not look like it's going well for him. Okay, so we could be happy about that, except that there are also nuclear weapons, and that's always something to think about.
Naval and special forces troops of two countries fight each other. In Ukraine, we call it a ceasefire. Because that's what had been going on.
So by sowing chaos and confusion at the level of information, you sap the moral unity of the people that you're attacking. So they can't unite to justify to themselves even a singular and effective response.
What you do is you isolate the victim, which is what the Russians have done, or had done. They isolated Ukraine so that instead of seeing Ukraine simply as the victim of a Russian invasion in 2014, which is what happened, in the West we've had a lot of conversations about, well, are the Ukrainians living up to their obligations under Minsk? Well, are the Ukrainians doing enough here? And you get rapidly into this, faults on both sides kind of thing, which paralyzes Western response. There aren't faults on both sides, faults on one side here. There are faults on the side of the Russians who invaded in 2014 and have invaded again. That's faults on one side.
That's the consequence of an injudicious even-handedness.
Right, exactly.
That's a tough one because there's the strong moral impulse to even-handedness and also to self-correction, right? To examine yourself for your own faults, which we seem to be more than good enough in some sense in the West.
Yep.
But that can be capitalized on. And it's an interesting moral conundrum, isn't it? Because there's a time for decisive action that requires a certain level of moral certainty, and that means you're not even-handed under those conditions. So now let me ask you another question that's associated perhaps with the disinformation front. There are many people around the world, in the West as well, claiming that in some real sense Ukraine isn't an independent state. It's part of Russia. It has been historically. It's not Germany. It's not a country with a clear historical existence. It's a and so what do you? So you're obviously not very happy with that argument, but that is being made continually, and so
I know. I'm laughing because you mentioned Germany, and the natural, that of course Germany is naturally a country. Really? That wasn't a natural thought until 1871.
Right. Well, we forget about how difficult it was for those countries we think were forever around to unify themselves. You can imagine two consequences of that. One would be that support for Putin within the country vanishes, and the demonstrations that we've already seen start to increase in scope. And I suppose the other possibility is, bombing people into submission, so to speak, often produces much more resistance than anyone attempts or intends or assumes. And so is there any possibility that these sanctions might backfire and increase support for Putin, or do you think that disintegration into chaos possibility is more probable? One of the things that puzzles me in some sense is why doesn't Russia conceptualize itself as part of the West? Like, why does Russia insist upon viewing itself as an entity independent of the West, especially given the fact that it isn't exactly obvious that Putin is an admirer of what happened under Lenin and Stalin in the Soviet Union? And so I don't understand why we have to have this notion that it's Russia against the West. It's why he doesn't trust the West, we don't trust him. Like, what's the dynamic? I know they're trying to find a fourth way or something like that philosophically in Russia. Why are we in this situation where Russia doesn't conceptualize itself as part of the West?
Putin bitterly resented that, hated it, attacked it, and it is one of his grievances that, in fact, that occurred. That was not done by the Pope, that was done by the Patriarch Istanbul.
Well, people might be wondering why we've taken a detour into a religious direction, but the answer is we're trying to sort out the issue of the degree to which Russia rightly regards itself as an autonomous community independent of the West. And in order to answer that question properly, you have to delve down to the bottom of the cultural separation, and near the bottom is, well, the relative autonomy of the Orthodox Church. And I have talked to people in Washington who are associated with the Orthodox Church in Russia, and they do claim that Putin goes to confession and that there is some validity to his claims to have adopted some approximation of Orthodox Christianity. That obviously leaves open the issue of what the relationship is between the political power and the church power. It doesn't seem to be entirely unidirectional. And one of the things that also is a mystery to me in relationship to that is that you can trace a fairly clear line of development of democratic thought in the West proper to Protestantism in particular, which is grounded in Christianity, and there's a fair bit of emphasis on individual sovereignty in Orthodox Christianity, but there wasn't a development into a democratic polity in the same way there was, especially in Northern Europe. And I can't really understand why that is. It doesn't seem to be a doctrinal issue exactly that stems from the faith itself. Well, when things are going chaotically wrong, one of the simplest things to do always is to identify make a unitary assumption of cause and to make it external.
Of course.
It's convenient in 50 ways.
Right.
First of all, it gives you an enemy to unite against. It gives you an enemy to talk about politically. It solves your conscience. It's also very simple because the reason that the former Soviet Union was so catastrophically chaotic in the 1990s, the reasons for that are unbelievably complicated and detailed.
Right.
And they go all the way from the highest levels of government to the nature of arrangements within families, right? The whole society was authoritarian for, 70 years, murderously authoritarian. Let's move to future actions.
Yeah.
So the West is united, well, the world is united, except for the exceptions that you already described, and Putin is having a lot of trouble on the ground, and as far as you're concerned, he wasn't well prepared either on the propaganda or the military front, and he's going to suffer substantial economic costs, and so at the moment, this does not look like it's going well for him. Okay, so we could be happy about that, except that there are also nuclear weapons, and that's always something to think about. How do we not, what's the right reaction? It's not an underreaction, it's not an overreaction. Yeah. What do you think is an intelligent pathway forward as far as you're concerned? And do you feel comfortable in even detailing out such a thing?
Sure. Yeah, I'm comfortable with it. There's, we don't do secrets very well, and that's, this is straightforward.
I guess I meant confident in your knowledge about making such a. We've talked about an unprovoked, unwarranted, and illegal attack by Russia on Ukraine, which is by all indications a sovereign state, by legally and otherwise. We've talked about why the Russians might have been motivated to do that historically and also proximally. We've talked about the situation on the ground and internationally. The Russians are having more trouble than they might have predicted on both fronts, and I suppose that's good news in some sense for the rest of the world and for Ukraine. We've talked about the pitfalls associated with that. We've talked about how this might move forward and should move forward, partly in terms of supporting Ukraine's and the Ukrainians' attempts to defend themselves, and then what might occur after that. You've talked about your belief that the world response, because I won't call it the Western response, the world response is likely to be measured and careful, and that as far as you're concerned at the moment, you don't see radical danger in this tit for tatting up to some ultimate exchange.